I had an Airbnb property for numerous years. I gave up because it was too stressful to keep up with it while also working my regular job. The advantages of using Airbnb instead of renting out your home usually include that you will be able to make a lot more money if your house is frequently rented, especially if it is in a high-traffic location for vacations. Airbnb was an excellent alternative for us. My wife and I were excited at first, but as more people rented the house, the demands increased. We had to maintain everything on time. Hire cleaning services. After the initial clients went and before the next ones arrived, I made sure to respond to their letters and emails as soon as possible, but things were going well for a couple of years until we had what we believed was a young couple living at the house. When they arrived, I sent them the door unlock code, as I always did. I practically never saw the customers once they informed me that they were inside and everything was fine. I sat back and relaxed for the remainder of the day. I should also emphasize that I rarely communicated with consumers beyond a few texts. They normally text me when they arrive and leave, with the occasional query about the house, but that's about it. But as 9 o'clock approached and I was about to prepare for bed, I received a text message from the young man who was staying at the house. He said he'd call me in a minute, and then he did. I already had a horrible feeling about the text, but what he stated startled me. He claimed that the water was not working in the residence. Of course, I apologized, though I didn't understand how it was possible, but living in a house without water is terrible, so I knew I needed to get it rectified right away. I asked if I could come check it out quickly so that someone could come in the morning and fix it. He consented, remaining nice throughout, and I drove over there a few minutes later. I observed 2 automobiles as I pulled into the driveway. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a red flag, but rather an interesting item I observed because they appeared to be a young couple on vacation for one night, so I couldn't understand why they would rent 2 different automobiles. I assumed someone was paying them a visit, which is not permitted, but I wasn't too concerned. I approached the front door, knocked, entered the code, and walked inside. It was quite silent. I expected them to be waiting for me, but they were nowhere to be seen. I definitely should have looked around for them first, but I was sleepy and wanted to get this done. I walked down to the basement and checked the main water valve to make sure there wasn't a leak or a flood. Everything appeared normal, with no water or evidence of damage. I was perplexed at first, but when I fiddled with the valve, water began to flow again. I turned it more, realizing it had been entirely turned off manually. I lingered in the basement for another minute, trying to figure out why this was done, before I began to feel quite uneasy, especially because I didn't see anyone when I stepped in. I just couldn't see how anyone else could have turned off the water, which meant they were attempting to get me to come over on purpose or giving them a discount on their stay to compensate for the inconvenience. I decided to go and retrieve my car, then call them back just to be safe. I stood up and began walking towards the stairs until I heard the basement door open, followed by several sets of footsteps down. When they reached the bottom, 3 men stood there. "Is it fixed?" One of them said something that sounded like the man I spoke with on the phone, but all of these men were much older than the young man I assumed was staying at the residence. I assured him it should be working now and that the valve must have just tightened on its own. I tried not to assign blame because the whole situation was making me uncomfortable. I really wanted to get out of the basement and away from these guys. They all just stood there staring at me, saying nothing after that. "So, let me know if you require anything else." I continued crossing between them, attempting to get to the stairs. They were still standing there, watching me walk around them, but as I passed the 3rd guy closest to the stairs, I noticed a gun stuffed in the back of his jeans. It freaked me out a little, so I hurried up the steps, but they didn't follow. They remained in the basement as I walked out the door and drove away. When I went home, I woke up my wife and explained what had happened. She persuaded me to phone the police to check on them. They weren't the folks we expected to be there, and the circumstances were unusual, so it felt justified. I believe we waited around 20 minutes before receiving a call from an officer who stated that no one appeared to be home and that he might require me to unlock the door. Instead, I gave him the code, and he called back 20 minutes later, reporting there was no trace of anyone remaining present. The next day, we discovered that the man's credit card had been stolen and that they had also taken various expensive decorations and appliances from the property. I suppose there was never a young couple. The only thing left unexplained was their entire scheme, which involved the water not working. I believe they either wanted me not to charge them for their stay so that they could use the stolen card for a longer period of time, or they intended to rob me at gunpoint, which begs the question of why they did not. 3 menacing, unidentifiable men were blocking my exit in the basement after leading me into a trap, yet they simply let me leave. It doesn't make sense to me, but after that I never went to the house while customers were there, and a few months later we stopped using Airbnb and simply listed the place for rent. Last year, I took a solo trip to Salt Lake City. I had never taken many vacations previously, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I'd be able to spend time somewhere else entirely on my own. I know that sounds strange, but being alone is okay with me, especially because I wouldn't get to be alone anyhow. I looked for both hotels and Airbnbs in the region, and to my surprise, the Airbnbs were nicer and less expensive. However, all of the cheaper options were further out from the city. I was driving my own car, so I didn't mind having to travel to the city and chose a nice-sized Airbnb. It was small, but the kitchen and bedroom were beautiful, and that was all I cared about. I arrived at 6 on Sunday morning. The owner sent me the password, and I brought everything inside. It was a lot nicer than the cramped flat I lived in with my roommate once I got everything inside and set up. I got on the couch and switched on the television. It was a 10-hour drive, so I was looking forward to relaxing for the night and appreciating the solitude. I fell asleep fast, but it was only around 7 p.m., so my body awoke me a few hours later. It was just past 10 o'clock, and the television was still turned on. I grabbed the remote and switched it off before standing up to get a glass of water before heading to my bedroom. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, I felt a powerful chilly breeze blow against me. With my sleepy eyes, I looked to my right and noticed that the front door was completely open. My eyes sprung wide, and my heart raced. I glanced at the door for a bit before looking around the room. I knew I had closed and secured it, but this was really worrying me out. I stepped over to the door and gently closed it, listening carefully for any noises of someone within. For perspective, I'm not the biggest person in the world, but I'm quite tall and fit, so unless an intruder had a gun, I was confident I could drive them away. I took a kitchen knife and proceeded from room to room, inspecting every inch of the home while remaining quiet. Nobody was there, which perplexed me even more, so I texted the homeowner, asking if someone was scheduled to come over tonight or something and detailing what occurred. It was late, so I didn't expect an immediate response. I went around the house, locking each door, and then quickly checked it again while I was more awake than before. I was still quite fatigued. I went to bed and fell asleep without difficulty. When I awoke, however, I was far less peaceful than before. I heard something outside my bedroom door, not the home itself. I didn't know what to do and just froze, waiting for whoever was outside the room to take action first. As I sat in bed, I wondered how the person had gotten in. The homeowner was the only person who could have the password to the door, so I was certain it was him. This boosted my confidence. Must be some weird person who enjoys spying on the guests who stay at his Airbnb. I got out of bed, still hadn't heard anything else, and took my phone from the nightstand to call the cops. I must have made too much noise, though, because almost immediately someone began running away from the door and toward the front of the house, which frightened me even more knowing that the intruder was standing right next to the bedroom door the entire time I dialed 911, but nothing else happened during the time it took the cops to arrive. The individual had left. I found a hotel to stay in for the remainder of my vacation, but the owner of the Airbnb granted me a refund because he could establish it wasn't him. He was concerned about it, and he was a very sweet old man. It was unsettling enough when I assumed it was the owner, but knowing it was just a random stranger makes it even worse. I have no idea how he got in or why he was stalking me, but just thinking about it gives me shivers. The most vivid memory for me is waking up to see the front door open. Now that I know someone was in the house, that means they came in, observed me sleeping on the couch, and then did whatever they were there to do. It's simply very unsettling and disturbing, and it makes me never want to stay at an Airbnb alone. I stayed in a small 2-bedroom Airbnb during a vacation last year. This place was on the route to another Airbnb where I planned to spend the majority of my trip, but it was more of a nightly rest stop. The space was clean and vacant, as expected. When I arrived, I strolled around the entire house to check it out before bringing in my luggage and relaxing on the couch. It was about 8 p.m. by this point, and as I was dozing off, the doorbell rang, jolting me awake. I looked over at the front door, perplexed and concerned. I was a small young girl. Therefore, it's safe to assume I get terrified easily and dislike talking to strangers, especially at night when I'm alone. I stood up and walked over to the door. On the other side, I can hear two men whispering to each other. There was no safety lock on the door, so I just kept it shut and called out to them, "Hello. Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" A man called out. I loudly asked what they meant, not understanding what being here for the Airbnb was supposed to mean. He responded, saying that he had the place booked for the night. I knew there had to be some sort of mistake, so I told him, still yelling through the door, that I had it booked as well and that he needed to contact the owner. The man didn't seem happy about that, although if I were in his position, I'd be pretty upset too. I heard one pair of footsteps walk away from the door, while the other man asked again if I could open the door so that we could talk about it. I was about to give in, putting my hand on the doorknob, thinking that he seemed believable, but something came over me telling me to just play it safe. I said my husband would be down to figure it out in a few minutes. I didn't want them to think I was alone, so I was hoping that would catch him off guard if something was bad. The man didn't respond, though I waited for another minute because I didn't hear any footsteps leaving. But then I moved the short curtain to the side and looked out the small window the man I'd seemingly been talking to was facing towards his car parked in the driveway. And past him was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. A group of maybe 5 people was standing further down the driveway, kind of hiding as if waiting for a signal. They all had some form of face coverings. And I couldn't see the other side of the door, but I assumed there were even more people over there knowing that this was very likely a gang due to the city I was staying in. I was completely horrified. I backed away from the door, fully panicked, and tried not to hyperventilate. I then went to the bedroom to get my phone and call the police, and I could hear more footsteps all around the house. It was like I was surrounded by a pack of wolves who at any minute could crush the windows and break inside. I took my phone into the bathroom with me and called 911, trying to remain calm. The operator also told me to be quiet and stay calm as they were sending a group my way. It would be there in just a few minutes. I stayed on the line, still hearing footsteps walking around outside the place, until the horrible sound of wood bending and then snapping came from the front door. I was crying profusely now, trying to muffle my mouth with my hand. I listened as a whole group of people ran inside, opening doors and cabinets, before one approached the bathroom door and tried the handle. Here he yelled, then walked away. The group continued looting the house before sirens were heard in the distance, and they began to scatter out of the place. They had all left by the time the police got inside, and all of my luggage was gone, and my car had its windows shattered and was looted as well. One of the officers sat with me to discuss some details, and he informed me that they've been having problems with large groups or gangs breaking into homes recently. They don't think the main goal is to hurt the residents at all, but rather to just rob them of everything. So that's likely why they left me alone in the bathroom, knowing I wasn't a threat. Whether their intentions were to harm me or not, it was still terrifying. I know it likely had little to do with me staying at the Airbnb that night, but it has still made me really anxious every single time I stay at an Airbnb now.